Good evening. Welcome to Crawley Borough Council's probably third remote cabinet at this point. We have managed to get through a fair bit of the year so far, virtually, and no doubt at this rate we'll be seeing out the rest of the year this way as well. Welcome to members of the public who are tuning in to watch us live. If not, watching it on our YouTube channel Catching Up, as we now for the first time have the facility for members to catch up for a permanent record of what has been said as part of the decision-making process. And I would recommend that people make use of that. It's certainly something which is an important way of holding your representatives to an account. Due to the limitations of the technology, I'm afraid this is a meeting which is held in public. You can watch us, but it's not a public meeting, and that there is none of the participation you would usually be able to have during the course of a cabinet meeting. There are a lot of public meetings when things are normal at the council, which members of the public can attend and raise questions and participate in to some extent. And I would recommend that the public do take the opportunity to do that where they have issues where they're interested in once things have returned to normal. So we will not be taking any public questions at this meeting, but any questions which have been raised will be responded to in due course. The public and the press will still be able to hear us throughout all of this. And for any meeting being held virtually, voting will be held first by a recorded vote, because it's not easy to see which hands in the room or for everyone to show approval. So with the exception of the minutes, we will be asking for each member's opinion for or against each item after each decision is being taken, which will be led by Chris Pedlow, who is our Head of Democratic Services. We will be moving on in just a sec. Just to remind members, could you unmute yourselves when you are ready to speak, and allow 3 seconds once I've called you in for the slight time delay in connection for the camera to switch to you. Before I invite the Cabinet to confirm their attendance, could I ask that anyone who has their mobile phone near them puts it on silent, that there's no background noise from television or particularly noisy people in the background, given the option, and that your backgrounds are blurred. And in respect of agenda items 1 to 3, we'll be taking these items together. So without further ado, could I ask the Democratic Services Manager supporting me at the meeting tonight to introduce themselves and move on to item number 2.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Chris Pedlow, Democratic Services Manager, and now we'll invite the members to speak. Councillor Irvine.
Sorry, I wasn't. Yes, agree the minutes of the previous meeting.
Councillor Jahans.
Aye. Yes, approve the minutes of the previous meeting.
Councillor Lamb.
Councillor Peter Lamb, Leader of Crawley Borough Council. I approved the minutes of the last meeting and I have nothing to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Mullins.
Councillor Mullins, I approve the minutes of the last meeting, nothing to declare.
Councillor Peter Smith.
Councillor Peter Smith, representing Ifield and Ifield West. I have no interest to declare, and I approve the minutes of the 30th of September 2020.
Thank you. Can I, for clarity's sake, can I just check with Councillor Irvine and Councillor Jahans? Do you have any other declarations? Can you just?
No, I don't. Nothing to declare.
No, nothing to declare my end either.
Thank you. And for clarity's sake, Chair, Councillor Burrett, Councillor Crowe, and Councillor Belbin are also on the meeting, and we've had an apologies from Councillor Brenda Smith.
Great. Well, in that case, if any of those members who are also in the meeting do wish to speak to an item, could I ask them if they do have any interest at that point to declare them then. Saves a bit of time if they're not intending to speak on anything. Have we received any public questions to answer?
No, Chair, we haven't.
No. There is 2 items of business today where we are intending to take them out of the public's view. This is because they are commercially sensitive, and were we to discuss the item in public, it would likely jeopardise the council's commercial position in negotiating with other organisations, which would cost the taxpayer a good deal more as a result. These items are authority to approve the scheme budget and appoint a contractor for Breezehurst Phase 2 housing development and IT infrastructure to the public cloud. Councillor Pedley, sorry, not Chris, could you confirm whether or not we've received any representations on us conducting those items in private? You actually muted, Chris. I think it's the first time I've ever seen you do that.
Thank you. Can I just, no, we haven't received anything, Chair. And can we confirm the minutes as well, just for clarity's sake?
All members have approved the minutes, so on that basis, yes, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Item 6 is matters referred to Cabinet and report from the Chair of the Urban Scrutiny Commission, which is Councillor Belden. Rather than taking these all in one go, we'll be asking Councillor Belden to report back under each of the relevant reports that the OSC has reviewed to give the feedback of backbench members as to what they feel are the key issues with each report. So that brings us on to our first substantive item of business, which is item 7, submission Crawley local plan. I will hand over to Peter Smith, who's Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development, to briefly summarise that report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will do my best to be brief, introducing the report on the Submission Local Plan 2021-2037. We already went to consultation on our new draft plan between January to March 2020, after which we sought further advice from the Planning Inspectorate regarding the content and potential soundness of the plan. And as a result of that, you will see in section 5.9, we have made a number of alterations to the plan or amendments to the plan following that advice, and further discussions, and also the receipt of further consultation reports, consultants reports, I beg your pardon. So we now have in front of us the Submission Local Plan 2021-2037. The recommendation to Cabinet is to endorse the Submission Local Plan and recommend to request full council to approve it as outlined in section 2.3. So I put this recommendation to Cabinet.
Thank you. Could I call in Councillor Belden to report back on the views of the Urban Scrutiny Commission on this item?
Indeed you can. Thank you, Councillor Lamb. We obviously appreciated just how much work had gone into the local plan, but we had just a few items that were queried. Explanation was sought regarding the removal of section 106 contributions towards education, where officers were able to put our minds at rest by saying the local authority would be able to would get contributions via CLL rather than section 106. There were also concerns raised over the proposed allocation of the Gatwick Green employment area. Whilst members could understand there was a need for employment provision within the borough, the location was queried as there is the strategic gap between Crawley and Hawley would be eroded. But officers said the needs of the community in terms of employment as well as safeguarding the green space had to be balanced, and Crawley needed approximately 24 hectares of employment floor space. It was felt that this area was the only area capable of sustaining a strategic employment location. The allocated site was much larger than the anticipated built-up area of any development scheme to ensure that sufficient infrastructure and landscaping between the neighbouring sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I see any hands, please? Or people on, could people turn their cameras on if they would like to speak to this item at this point? Councillor Smith, you'd like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm happy with the comments from the Overview and the Scrutiny Commission, which have been noted and were answered and discussed in full at the OSC meeting. I would just comment regarding the probably quite significant changes to the safeguarding land and the bringing forward employment land. The recommendation does include a further statutory 6-week consultation period, which will allow all residents to submit comments and also potential developers and anybody who has a view on that. So that's a key part of the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would any other member like to speak to the report? No. An awful lot of work goes into producing local plans. They are accounting for the entire use of land within the borough over a 15-year period. And could we thank the officers involved for putting this together, for the enormous amount of work which is involved, balancing a very complicated set of interests. Certainly, I've sought clarification on 1 or 2 points of this, and I've been very reassured by officers that those issues are addressed. Could we come to a vote then, if there are no other people wishing to raise a point? And I hand over to Chris Taylor to take us through it.
Councillor Irvine, can you please confirm your vote by putting your camera
For.
on? Councillor Jahans, can you put your camera on and show your vote, please?
4, please.
Councillor Lamb.
4. 4.
Councillor Mullins.
4. Councillor Mullins is 4.
And Councillor Peter Smith.
For the recommendation.
Chair, that was a unanimous vote in favour of the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Which brings us on to item 8, which is the budget strategy 2021/22 to 2025/26. There's been a great deal of communication, both between members and with the public, about the current financial situation facing the council. For the first time in the last 6 years, we're in a position where the council has little alternative other than to make cuts to make savings in order to balance the budget. The reality is that the impact of COVID-19 on the council's finances leaves us with very little ability to generate new income. The budget strategy which has been set out before us does not contain the detail of what is to come. It is an outline of how the council will seek to develop that budget over the next few months, which will eventually be presented to the public as the final version of the budget at the meeting in February. The budget strategy makes it clear that we'll be looking to resolve our current financial issues over a 4-year period, but we will be trying to prioritise as much of that as soon as possible to get ourselves on track, because the reality is that whatever the public believe is the case, or are often told is the case, the council's reserves are not what they were 10 years ago. The council has much more limited reserves than it once did, and we need to ensure that as much money as possible is saved by the taxpayer in order to ensure that it goes towards future services rather than having to pay back significant loans. As a result, we'll be trying to move at pace to address an awful lot of these things while doing it in a way which is sustainable and without having a serious impact upon our most disadvantaged members of our community. Amongst the proposals is that we are combining a number of existing reserves to form a COVID-19 support reserve to deal any additional expenditure that we face as a result of the pandemic over this period of time, above that set out in the budget. That we'll be looking to deal with this £2.25 million saving that we need to do, in part through raising council tax by 9.5p per week. So over the course of the year, that's £4.95 on the average Band D property. Worth bearing in mind, of course, most properties in Crawley are not Band D, they're actually Band C, so it's a lower amount for most households. that we'll be trying to do so through a combination of different ways, which will include trying to increase income. But the reality is that in the midst of a pandemic with things locked down, it's very difficult to find new ways of generating additional money. So the reality is a lot of this will be made from savings and efficiencies, which the public have commented on and given their feedback to us through the course of a public consultation, which is being considered by elected members at the moment in terms of what, on the basis of what the public set out, we believe are the best alternatives available to us to try and close that gap. In addition, we are choosing not to commit to further capital expenditure above what is already planned at this time, due to its implications on the revenue of the council. But we are continuing to undertake significant investment in new council housing and in bringing forward more affordable housing for the public. It comes out of a separate account that the council has, so it doesn't affect services, and we are very much committed to trying to get a roof over people's heads so that they can afford as much as possible for as many people as possible. That is the totality of the recommendations which have been set out in front of us. And I'll now hand over to Councillor Belden as Chair of the Open Scrutiny Commission to give us feedback from other members.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. The Commission received clarification on a number of points within the report, and during the discussion with yourself and the Head of Corporate Finance, we discussed that the town centre would require additional support post-COVID, but the newly formed Town Centre Business Improvement District intended to have a positive impact on the area, to work hard to create a safer town centre for shoppers, businesses, their employees, and to grow the number of visitors. The Economic Development Team would work with BID, retail key partners within the town centre, and to continue to provide services using various different methods. Also, confirmation was received regarding their overall objective. In the past, budgets have been balanced over 3 years, but because of the pandemic, we were hoping to work towards 4 years now, I believe. Also, there was acknowledgement that Table 4 within Section 6.2 should commence with the years 21/22. Explanation was also sought that the investment properties listed within the capital strategy linked to those within the Treasury management were purchased for the sole purpose of achieving a yield. Further properties were listed and they still achieve a yield, but they were purchased for another reason and were existing assets of the council. The other the query raised was there was concerns about the earmarked reserves for the town centre market being transferred to a COVID support reserve. But officers said the nature of the town centre as a result of the pandemic would be undergoing a rapid change, and this included the market. Finally, confirmation was sought concerning the works at Milton Mount Flats, whether this was gross costs or net of leaseholders' contributions, and officers were able to confirm that they were in fact the gross costs, and the contributions will be taken as income as and when received. And that concludes our comments on that section.
Would anyone liking to speak, who would like to speak on this item, please turn on their camera. Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chairman. You were right to highlight that this is the budget strategy and not the actual budget, although this is a very important document in itself. I hope we all know the difficulties that local government and indeed national governments across the world find themselves in at this time, given the COVID pandemic. I've been a member of this council 17 years, and I've never seen prospects like this for local government with the difficulties that are being faced. The budget strategy itself will be supported by myself and the Conservative group. Looking at the recommendations, it is right to have the flexibility to enable to balance the budget over a 4-year period, should that be needed. Because of the huge uncertainty that exists out there, we do need that flexibility, so that is definitely welcome. Also, obviously support number E, which is that we agree that savings, efficiencies and increased income identified by officers are approved to help reduce the budget gap. I am interested in under G, which talks about the capital programme, and the final sentence of that says that due to the pandemic, capital schemes will be standalone and reported separately to cabinet meetings. I didn't spot that referenced elsewhere in the report, but it may have been. I may have omitted to see it, but I presume that's going to be sort of separate items rather than the entire programme. But any sort of clarification on that would be welcome. I was also interested in the references to commercial activity, and we have a breakdown of the property assets that the council has purchased to generate an income, and that it is a significant amount. I noticed that there is no budget allocation for any future purchases, but a limit has been set. I think it was at 8 million should any purchases be made. Now, obviously, I appreciate this is very difficult times, but what I would be interested to know is if there was an opportunity, did suddenly present itself to the council, where the council could potentially purchase a property that we knew and had that certainty that it would produce a good income for the council, that there is the flexibility for the council to be able to move quickly enough to potentially seize that opportunity. But I wouldn't know what the process for that would be. It may well be there are no opportunities, of course, but I'd just be interested to know if we still do have that flexibility available to us, because as you said yourself, Leader, it's very difficult to find income opportunities at this time. But given that we are very likely to be in a W-shaped recession, there could potentially be assets coming onto the market where a quick buyer could potentially help to generate a future income, for us as a council, and that would be a good use of public money. So supporting the strategy, and a few questions and points there. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just responding on the issue of buying new properties. Look, I mean, we would love to be in a position where we could undertake expenditure which would generate additional income, because it offsets any forms of cuts we might have to make. I think the reality is, for the next year ahead, the situation in terms of our, not only the UK's economy, but particularly Crawley's economy, in terms of just how vulnerable it is to the impact of COVID, is that we are unlikely to be in a position where a good opportunity comes forward. In fact, we're already quite exposed with our levels of assets within the local area, which may well be vulnerable to losing current occupiers. So we on that basis, it's not something which is likely to happen, but in the event that a good opportunity presents itself, we would be in a position where we could take a decision quite quickly using the resources we already have available. It's worth bearing in mind at the moment, though, that any additional capital expenditure at this point is going to rely upon borrowing, on the basis that we are already at the limit of what we can reasonably spend in terms of the reserves. We need to keep a certain level of reserves safe, and on that basis, for our own safety in terms of future decision making. And on that basis, we are unlikely to be in a position where we could do it without having to borrow, which will then have to finance it debt. Regardless, a good opportunity could come ahead, and we'll be keeping our eyes peeled. But I think we really can't. Nothing over the past 6 months has gone our way in terms of things being lucky, and I don't see any reason why at this point we should start assuming that they might do. So we're going to prepare for the worst case scenario and try and get through this as best we can. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment briefly on Councillor Tina Belbin's response from the Overview and Scrutiny Commission. noting that we now have a town centre business improvement district in the town. This is something that the council has supported, and we hope that it will help to drive the town centre businesses forward and to support their activity. And I'm pleased that the OSC and others are noting that. And I also need to declare an interest as I'm the council's nominee as a board director. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mullins.
Thank you, Leader. I don't want to take too long, but I just wanted to say that what we're facing is we're facing for the first time, I think, in the history of this town and probably the history of this country, where nothing like this has ever happened before. To this extent, I think even in the war times, things were different to this, because this has been caused by a pandemic and the shutting down of our major industries, which are our resources for both work and for tax collection, and that's the basic economy of our town. What I wanted to feel confident about, because I know we're not going to discuss detail in this today, was that as we go through or as we go on, that we find some way of communicating with the residents of the town so that they fully understand, and that could be a joint communication, as we're agreeing things together now with our Conservative colleagues, to notify the people of the town about what our situation is and why we may be struggling to keep some services going or changing services, but certainly not keeping the services the way they were before. And obviously the priority is always going to be statutory services, but there are many other services that people receive in this town, because we've in the past have had enlightened policy decisions made which are there for the welfare and well-being of our residents, and they're things that the people do appreciate. So we need to be communicating. I think that's what my position is on this. Whilst we've got to agree this reality that we're facing, we must communicate our situation to the people of Crawley. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other people wishing to speak? No. In that case, Chris, could we move it to a vote?
Councillor Irvine.
For.
Councillor Jahans.
For.
Councillor Lamb.
For.
Councillor Mullins.
For.
And Councillor Smith.
For.
Chair recommendation was passed unanimously.
Thank you very much. Item number 9 is the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review. Councils are required to state where they put their financial resources, and we report this every 6 months. The first point we report it as part of the Treasury Management Strategy, explaining where the council's money will be put or how it be sought to be invested over the course of that year. And this is the mid-year review, explaining how it has been invested over the course of that year. This is in part to ensure that we're not investing in anything unwise or which the public would not feel comfortable investing in. And the report does detail all the different categories of investment and who they are with at any one time. The clearest thing coming out of the report really is just how little money the council is now generating from its investments. At peak, we were generating about £6 million a year from the council's investments, which we used to then subsidise the cost of services, giving us a revenue budget of which most district councils could only dream. We were spending about double what many of those district councils were spending. which kind of explains how hard the shift has been transitioning to this more modest income over recent years. The reason for this at this point in time is, yes, a number of those resources have been spent to keep the council afloat over these recent years and to improve the fabric of the town. But in terms of what is left, it is being invested at a very low interest rate, as interest rates, which had not been thought they could go any lower, have been cut even further to try and keep the economy afloat throughout the course of the pandemic. So it is unlikely that that is going to be generating any significant money for the council anytime soon. With that, I'd like to hand over to Councillor Belvin to report back on the views of the Overland Scrutiny Commission.
Thank you, Chair. The Commission confirmed and received clarification on a number of points. The Leeds Building Society, it is a covered bond and it's secured by and backed by a government bond, and that's why it's got a AAA rating. Also, queries were raised that we invested at 0%, but this was explained because obviously at times we had to do short-term investing so we could react quickly. Nobody knew what was going to happen with COVID and what our income situation would be. There was also confirmation that Appendix 1 included the overall weighted average for the portfolio detailed holdings. So the number of days at the bottom was 148, and that was the average weighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask any members who would like to speak on this item to please turn their cameras on now? Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I just think it's worth highlighting that the page numbers throughout the whole committee papers are somewhat skew-with. So it's pages 45 to 53 I've written down for this report, as opposed to 33 to 54 as is printed. But clearly we do take a lot more care of our money than we do when it comes to numbering pages. I recall, I've been around a long time now, and I remember the last recession that we had, where the banking crisis played a significant part of that. And I remember the issues around Treasury management and what we did subsequently in terms of initially not investing in banks abroad. We were concerned about the safety of our funds, but now we have a completely different type of issue. And while yield is the third criteria that we use into where we look at where we place our money, it is now actually becoming an issue, because the table at the bottom of and I need to go back to my pages to see which one it is, page 45. I think it says for the downside risk that this is negative interest rates. There's no minus there, but it's this little table under paragraph 4.1. It's got an upside risk and what our experts tell us, and then what the downside risk. I think that's a potential negative interest rate. But the point I'm making follows on from what you said, Leader, about how we're hardly getting any income out of this at all compared to what we were. But I'd hate us to be in a position where actually it was costing us money to deposit our funds. And do we have any sort of mitigations possible? Whether it's we do have a large bunker at the bottom of the town hall, possibly to store some of our savings. But I speak in jest. But in all seriousness, we've come to expect the unexpected these days, haven't we? But I would hope we don't get into negative interest rate territory. But there could be concerns that it starts to cost us money to deposit our funds, and certainly there's an element of work involved in depositing our funds, and that could possibly start to take up any small income that we do have. But I'm sure you're very alert to this, Leader.
It is certainly a challenge. It is not impossible. We have invested in several things at 0% interest rates because we needed somewhere to put the money over that period of time. The council, as you say, has the top importance of security of investment. and that eliminates some classes of investment that we might otherwise go with that would potentially offer bigger yields. That being said, for instance, investing in the market. That being said, actually at the moment that's a pretty risky place to be putting money, and is unlikely to do that well in terms of money either, because we continue to be subject to significant restrictions around operational activity for businesses that would likely see us see our money get even worse. The safest place or the best place to put money at the moment, frankly, is in the government in the form of bonds, but bonds actually are getting to the point where they have a negative interest rate. So there really isn't much we can do at all to I'd say, bolster the council's investments without taking risks, which we are certainly, I think the council's 151 officer, who's legally responsible for the council's financial situation and to call in the government where we do things that are unreasonable, would probably ask some serious questions if we were to try and opt for riskier types of investments. And certainly we've seen councils not far from here go under for some of the riskiness of some of their investments of late. Would any other members like to speak? No. Okay, in that case, can we move it to a vote, please?
Councillor Irvine.
4.
Councillor Jahans.
4.
Councillor Lamb.
4.
Councillor Mullins.
4.
And Councillor Peter Smith.
4.
Chair, that was a unanimous vote in favour of the recommendations.
Thank you. Item 10 is quarterly budget monitoring, which is again me. The budget monitoring produces reports every quarter, which details how the council's actual expenditure has deviated from its planned expenditure. It will not come as a surprise to anyone that the council is currently in deficit against its budget, which was drawn up last February before the pandemic hit. There has been some progress. We are about £400,000 better off in terms of our current situation than we were a quarter ago, but that's largely due to having received a government grant to cover part of our expenditure, even though we are still over £1 million away from the government fully compensating us for our initial expenditure. And this report does actually detail all the forms of additional expenditure from COVID, forms of lost income, and the compensation we received from central government in dealing with it. It essentially sets out what the public already know, that councils are struggling, that the reasons we are struggling is due to COVID, and while that is creating a challenge in the current budget year, it's going to be even tougher in years moving forward due to the impact on council tax collection and business rates collection, in addition to our investments. I believe now it's the IP and Scrutiny Commission, so could I hand over to Councillor Belvin?
Thank you, Chair. Well, various items were discussed. There was confirmation that the favourable and unfavourable indications within the budget monitoring variances referred to the projected variances against the original budget, not the movement in the variance between the two quarters. There was also acknowledgement that the staffing resources increased during the first lockdown within the contact centre. However, it was not anticipated that these services will undergo similar demands or pressures in the future. Also, that it was discussed the capital programme, and there was acknowledgement that some of these items may slip to next year, for instance, the town hall and purchase of properties. We also discussed the unsupervised play area investment working group had been established to investigate the different play area improvements, in particular the Wakeham's Green side, and the investment will be discussed as part of this group. Explanations were sought and obtained on the contributions to reserves within the general fund. The council's budget position has been raised with the external auditors, who believe the council has good governance, project and risk management where appropriate, which is very pleasing to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any members who would now like to speak please turn on their cameras? Gurinder.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chair. It makes for some quite bleak reading, doesn't it? As you said, Peter, councils across the country are struggling, and certainly we are as well. I think at this point it's worth restating. I think it was actually mentioned in one of the previous reports about what the Centre for Cities report said about us being one of the hardest hit, I think the hardest hit and most vulnerable town in the UK to the pandemic, and the numbers really do quite reflect that. I just also wanted to pick up on a couple of things on the fact that we've seen an exponential rise in the number of UC claimants and what that means for the council as well in terms of an increase in council tax reductions, which may translate further into next year. The Chancellor today during the spending review was talking about how unemployment could hit 2.6 million by Q2 next year. So the numbers look bad now, and I don't mean to be more of a pessimist, but just to say really that, to look at it in that context, that, you know, with potentially more unemployment on the horizon, the future of the budget situation as well will be under even more pressure, which means the difficult decisions that we'll have to take coming up are all the more important as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Thank you, Leader. I don't want to say for too much, but except that we have done a lot of work in my portfolio in the last number of years, designing things that were to bring income into the council and to help our resources and build our resources on an ongoing basis, and to make many of our areas that you know, are good for the well-being of Crawley and things that people enjoy and love, to make them as self-sufficient as possible. And yet we've had to see this period since March when we've seen these places close down and income stagnating from them. In fact, to some extent costing us money in trying to deal with contractors. It's a pretty abysmal situation, which I hope and pray that won't last forever, and that we can turn it around at some time in the near future. But I think that people ought to understand really what's going on, because the things that make Crawley wonderful are the things that we've closed down at the moment, and until we get the all clear to maybe through an inoculation or something else to open things up, we won't be able to get up and running again, and we do have to accept that recovery in any case will take some time. So I accept the report in its entirety, but it's a sad bit of reading for me.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this report? No. In that case, could we please move to the vote?
Councillor Irvine.
4.
Councillor Jahans.
4.
Councillor Lamb.
4.
Councillor Mullins.
4.
Councillor Peter Smith.
4.
Chair, that's unanimous in favour of the recommendations.
Thank you. Item 11 is the appropriation of garages from the HRA to the general fund. Can I hand over to Councillor Irvine to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to do so. The reason why this has come forward at this moment is because, of course, as described in 3.3, we have a massive gap in our general fund, as you know, housing revenue accounts are ring-fenced by law, so money can't be taken out of the housing revenue accounts and used to subsidise general funds. However, garages are assets which can either be in the housing revenue account or in the general fund, and by transferring them from the housing revenue account to the general fund, I like to think it's the housing revenues account's contribution to what is almost a war effort. It will have a significant benefit for the general fund. And for the housing revenue account, I'd like to reassure councillors that it won't mean that people are paying more for their council house rent because rents are capped. It won't affect our repairs budget. It might in future affect the way we fund our new council house building programme, but that would be in the future. And in the same way that the general fund charges the housing revenue account for money which for work which is done on various areas of Crawley, so that the housing revenue account plays a proportion. The general fund will reimburse Crawley Homes for the cost of the work, repair work and administrative work, which the housing revenue account is going to be doing on behalf of the general fund. I had various conversations with officers about that. I'm quite happy with the outcome. And I'd just like to thank my shadow, Councillor Miller-Smith, for her support on that issue. So I think that's in a nutshell, Chair. I hope I've explained it properly.
Thank you. I had an understanding that Councillor Bright wishes to declare an interest on this.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Although I'm not participating in the meeting, as I'm here, I should just declare a personal interest as I rent a garage from council.
Thank you. Councillor Mullins.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, just quickly, just on page 80 on the listing, I was looking at the voids which come to 494. So on transfer, are we going to do anything about trying to get those 494 let out so that we don't have an amount of voids to that extent? The other thing that I wanted to ask was when this was first introduced as a policy to us, or a decision to be made, we did discuss situations with garages. Some garages in council houses are actually on the footprint of council houses or allocated to a particular council house and are near to it. And others with flats that we have got numbered garages which associate with the number of the flat, and they're linked into the flats. So when you separate garages from housing, there are complications in some areas, and I wondered if that had been picked up. I did mention it originally, but it would become relevant if somebody, for example, decided to exercise their right to buy, and on their footprint or nearby was an allocated garage that they were renting with the house. Would they be able to buy their house and the garage, for example, without undue complications? So some of all I'm saying is that some of the garages are linked to housing in a more physical way, and are rented out in a normal way as part of the house. So we do need to have addressed that, and I wanted assurances that that's been done. And then the other question that I posed earlier on was, what exercise can we do to get our voids down?
Well, if the garage is physically attached to a house, then that's incorporated into the lease and the rent. So the rent would stay with the HRA. In the event of sale, it would go with the house. There are one or two places where a house has been sold, but the garage has been retained. But those are historic, and the issue exists just as much with it paying into the HRA as it does with paying into the revenue account. In terms of voids, voids are high at the moment, or higher than usual, due to restrictions around the operation of the garages team throughout the course of the pandemic. meaning that number have not yet been let. But there is a plan to develop a comprehensive strategy around these different things over the next few months. And I also wanted to highlight to members a proposed amendment to the draft report to enable some of this to happen, which is a recommendation C to develop an appropriate pricing and fees regime for the letting of garages in consultation with the leader, and for these to take effect from the 1st of April 2021. While this had always been the intention of the council, it did not make it into the draft report, which is why we're being asked to consider it here today. Can I hand over to Councillor Crowe?
Thank you, Chairman. This is a significant recommendation from Cabinet. Indeed, it's a recommendation to full council. It's of a major decision, so I think it is useful to state at this stage that myself and the Conservative group do support Cabinet making this recommendation for it to progress to full council. We do need to use all the tools that we have and all the options that are available to help make the savings that we need to make the council sustainable going forward. It is worth noting under paragraph 5.3 on page 78 that it states we've got 5,022 garages in total, but 108 of them are linked to existing council tenancies, and those will be staying as part of the housing revenue accounts. That's 2% by my off the top of my head calculation. So it is the vast majority of garages that are transferring, and I think it's right that they are what are not linked to directly linked to council tenancies are indeed used as part of the overall pot for the council rather than the housing revenue account. So I trust the Cabinet will be making a recommendation for this to go forward. That certainly has my support. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on this? Please indicate by putting on your camera if you do. Councillor Irvine.
Well, just to add a couple of things to what you said, Chair, you answered the questions for me very well, thank you. Just to assure Councillor Mullins that obviously it's in no one's interest to have garages standing void, because a void garage doesn't produce any rent, but there's all sorts of reasons why they might be void. And as for anything else, I mean, in an exercise like this, there's bound to be an anomaly or two, but which we will iron out in the process. But the main thing to remember is that doing this is providing a major new source of income for the general fund, and I think that is the most important consideration of all at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly, it's saving people services with a small amount of accounting trickery. In that case, could I move the recommendations, including the amendments I added a second ago? Presumably, we need to take a vote on the amendment first. So, could Chris Pedlow?
Sorry. Councillor Irvine, do you approve the amendment?
For.
Councillor Johans on the amendment?
For.
Councillor Lamb?
For.
Councillor Mullins?
For.
And Councillor Smith?
For.
Chair, that's the amendment carried.
So we could move to a vote on the full report.
Councillor Irvine, as
For.
amended.
For.
Councillor Johans, as amended.
For.
Recommendation.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Lamb?
For.
Councillor Mullins,
4,
and Councillor Peter Smith.
4.
Chair, that's unanimous support for the amended and updated recommendations.
Thank you, which brings us on to agenda item 12, the expansion of the shared procurement service. The council already undertakes shared procurement exercises with several other councils, these being Horsham District Council and Mid Sussex District Council. We've been approached and have in a trial capacity worked with Mole Valley District Council. The purposes of this are that when we operate collectively, we get far better deals for residents in terms of our procurement. We're not obliged to go with the others, but it certainly gives us a very beneficial opportunity. And this report recommends that we continue with extend the trial arrangement rather into a permanent arrangement, working with Mole Valley on those. Would anyone like to speak on this? It did not go to the OSC, so it's just up to members present if they'd like to speak. No? Okay then, can we move that to a vote, please?
Councillor Irvine,
4.
Mr. Johans,
4.
Councillor Lamb,
4.
Councillor Mullins,
4,
and Councillor Peter Smith.
4.
Chair's carried unanimously.
Thank you. We have no supplemental agenda, and the remaining 2 items are excluded from the public for reasons already discussed at the start of the meeting, which means that the committee is asked to consider passing the following resolution: that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act by virtue of the paragraph specified against the item. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 The practicality of this is cabinet members now need to leave this live stream and go to the link which was sent previously for the committee to resume. So we're temporarily on hold until we're all on that call. Thank you very much.